The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sad to report that Via Rail is dying in the hands of this government. The results contained in Via's annual report are abysmal. By virtually every measure, Via is continuing a nose-down descent. Revenue is up slightly, but operating loss is climbing faster. Ridership, cost recovery, and on-time performances are all dropping dangerously. But for many reasons, they could be fixed if we cared, if we chose to. Yes, Canada is alone among the G8 nations in having no national transportation policy or strategy. We have cobbled together a hodgepodge of policies that lack coherence. When we expand our highway system, it's always called a critical investment. When we talk about passenger rail and the need for investment in that critical infrastructure, it's described as an endless subsidy. Canadian innovators in modern rail, like Bombardier, sell their fast and efficient trains to other nations, while our passenger rail system continues to decline and decay. For example, Via's program to rebuild their 30-plus-year-old cars that are the backbone of Via's Quebec-Windsor corridor operation was slated to cost about $99 billion with completion in 2013. This is 2015. Project costs have nearly doubled and now won't wrap up until 2017. Canada's passenger rail service has no legislative framework. Via is crippled by inadequate investment and a lack of enlightened national rail policy favoring more, not less service. This government is failing to improve our publicly owned passenger trains at a time when other nations are modernizing and expanding their systems. The Conservatives are deliberately starving Via and are not giving it the modern tools to turn itself around as the USA Congress has given to Amtrak. This government claims to be business savvy, but I see zero business smarts at work in their mismanagement of Via. I observe waste and decay at the expense of Canadian taxpayers, all under phony excuses about how Via is supposedly, allegedly, an arm's-length crown corporation that makes its own decisions. In 2012, the government cut $41 million from Via's annual operations. The Canadian, the country's only cross-country route, was cut from 3 trains a week to only 2 from October to April of each year. The Ocean, Via's Montreal to Halifax route, was reduced from 6 times weekly to only 3 at that time, cutting Via service to Atlantic Canada in half. The cancellation of half the Via route network and the abysmal treatment of our national rail passenger service can be brought down to one overarching problem: the total absence of a logical, visionary passenger rail policy for Canada. The fate of Canada's rail passenger system is, Mr. Speaker, hanging in the balance today. Misunderstood, underfunded, and seemingly without a powerful champion in Ottawa other than me, Via still represents an important national resource that Canada should be put on a firm footing that it has always required. But time is growing short, Mr. Speaker. If we lose what remains of our rail passenger system, we will stand alone among the G8, among the G20 group of nations. There are 2 no-cost steps that could kickstart Via's revival. The first is legislation, like that introduced by a private member from the NDP recently and voted down by the Conservatives, to establish Via's mandate, rights, obligations, and relationship with the exorbitant, usurious freight railways. Via has never had such legislation. This has always been at the heart of Amtrak's survival and success in the USA. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I finish, the other way to get Via back on track without spending scarce public dollars is by filling the 2 vacancies on Via's board with people who actually understand Via and care. Will the minister please consider appointing former Amtrak president and Cape Breton resident David Gunn to our Canadian Via board? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not sure where to begin on that one. Let me Let me start with some of the items that the member has raised in that self-congratulatory and yet rambling litany of things that he threw down. First of all, when it comes to the private members bill introduced by the official opposition, which was rightly opposed by this government, it was an attempt to ensure that rather than VIA operating as a business, and in fact that the business of VIA would be run from the floor of the House of Commons, particularly when it came to route selection, Mr. Speaker. And of course, there were a number of other important reasons why that was just not functional at all. I know the member likes to talk about investment in Via Rail when it came to improving and making significant capital investments of about $1 billion. I don't remember the member standing up in this House and actually voting to support that, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to the annual operational investments, we have opportunities on main estimates and everything else to support appropriations to Via Rail. It makes the support sound hollow, Mr. Speaker, by the member opposite when he can't stand in his place and support estimates for them. Now, when it comes to the appointment process, as in the case with all Crown corporations, appointments to the board of directors of Via Rail follow open, transparent, and competency-based selection processes that reflect the specific nature of the positions and the weight of their responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, full and part-time governor and council leadership positions follow comprehensive selection processes, which include the development of selection criteria that outline the qualifications required for the position. They're advertised in the Canada Gazette, on the federal government's appointments website, and on the public institution's own website, Mr. Speaker. The pool of candidates can also be established through a variety of other means, such as executive search firms, newspapers, professional journals. Interested candidates are assessed based on the requirements of the position. And further, to the interview of the qualified candidates, reference checks are conducted. Interested candidates for part-time director positions should forward their curriculum vitae to the Office of the Minister of Transport. Full-time leadership positions, recruitment processes are led by the Privy Council Office, Mr. Speaker. That would be instructive to the member opposite. And interested candidates can apply upon publication of a notice of vacancy in the Canada Gazette and on the Governor and Council Appointments website. The appointment process, I will remind the members, has been significantly strengthened, ensuring that all appointments are competency-based. That's a commitment that we continue to follow and improve upon, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, VIA needs a responsible government who leads and cares about passenger rail, effective passenger rail, as well as it needs some board members who have knowledge, experience, and informed passion for actually improving, not killing, privatizing, or declining passenger rail. I fully supported the excellent Via Rail Canada Act tabled earlier this year by the NDP MP from Gaspésie-Île-de-la-Madeleine. It dealt with the necessity of passenger priority over freight, the reduction of the outrageous track use charges to VIA by CP Rail and CN Rail, and called for a basic national network alterable only by Parliament, not just the Prime Minister. Now it's time to get VIA back on track, Mr. Speaker, in a new way. VIA's board needs former Amtrak President David Gunn, a man who has real-world railway experience and has the ability to actually save VIA. So I ask again, will the minister consider appointing Cape Breton resident David Gunn to our VIA board? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the member wishes he was back in the NDP. I don't know what to make of that last intervention. But what VIA needs, Mr. Speaker, is very simple. What VIA needs is the independence to operate as a Crown corporation and take care of its day-to-day operations and its affairs, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't need the House of Commons running its day-to-day affairs, and it certainly doesn't need the rhetoric of the member opposite. He should put his mouth and his votes where the money actually is with VIA, Mr. Speaker, and stand in support of the estimates and the budgets that we put forward that make sure that VIA is a successful Crown corporation.